Kiyu Neem sat on the bed, listening to the sound of running water from the bathroom. Bored, she glanced around the room, which was soaked in a sultry atmosphere. Today marked her 18th birthday. Fong Vu had given her 1,000 yuan as a birthday gift, telling her he had work tonight and wouldn't be able to celebrate with her. She was used to this by now and didn't take it personally. Turning 18 meant she was officially an adult, so she decided to give herself a coming-of-age gift she would never forget. The bathroom door swung open. A tall, handsome man stepped out with nothing but a towel wrapped around his waist. His toned six-pack abs were on full display, water droplets trickling down his chest and disappearing behind the towel. This was the escort Kiyu Neem had hired. She'd heard he was attractive and well-endowed. Duong knew exactly how to present himself. He walked over to the bed, leaned down, and gently pulled Kiyu Neem into his lap, his lips brushing against her delicate earlobe. She didn't resist, letting him kiss her ear, then trail his lips down toward her shish. Duong was the top escort at the club. Normally, one night with him would cost far more than 1,000 yuan. But tonight, he made an exception. The moment he laid eyes on Kiyu Neem, she had him hooked. She looked like a porcelain doll in her white dress, her delicate face glowing with youth. She couldn't be more than a high school senior. But it wasn't just her appearance. It was her calm, cool presence, like a white orchid, that captivated him. Rare beauty like hers didn't come around often. When he found out she came here to lose he guided her hand to his abs, letting her touch and explore freely. Kiyu Neem wasn't shy. She didn't just caress him, she gave his muscles a playful squeeze. Not bad. Watching her so into it, breathing in her subtle fragrance. Duong, just as he was about to indulge in the moment, a loud knock at the door shattered the tension. Annoyed, Kiyu Neem slipped off his lap and looked at him. You going to get that? Or should I? Of course. No man would let a girl, especially a first-timer, answer the door in. Sighing, Duong adjusted his towel and headed for the door. Who? Open up. Room check. A gruff voice replied from the hallway. Duong paused a moment, then unlocked the door. Two uniformed officers stood outside, flashing their badges. We need to check your IDs, one of them said. This wasn't Duong's first run-in with police doing room checks. As long as they had proper ID, he could just say they were a couple, no big deal. He stayed calm. Turning to Kiyu Neem, he said, Neem, can you grab our IDs? Mine's in my wallet, inside the jacket. She nodded, walked over, took both ID cards, and headed for the door. Until now, the door had only been cracked open, just enough to talk through. But when Kiyu Neem stepped into view, the officers finally saw her clearly. Kiyu Neem? One of the officers stared at her in shock. Startled, she whispered, Uncle Fong? Fong Vu's expression darkened as he looked at the girl in front of him. Then he turned to see the shirtless man standing nearby. What are you doing here? He asked coldly. He stepped forward and yanked her toward him, eyes narrowing as they scanned her from head to toe. The other officer froze in place, unsure what to do. Everyone knew how terrifying Fong Vu could be when he was angry. But Kiyu Neem wasn't intimidated. She met his gaze head-on, her face calm and unreadable. Fong Vu looked at Kiyu Neem and felt a pounding headache coming on. Technically, he was her stepfather, but he had never really played much of a parental role in her life. Not because she needed him to, she handled her studies, her life, everything, without asking for help. She had always been a good kid. That's why this shocked him so much. The good kid just got caught renting a hotel room with a man. Duong, sensing the tension, quickly tried to defuse the situation. Hey, sir, this isn't what it looks like. Neem, don't you dare call her that. Fong Vu's voice was ice cold. Hearing this man address her so intimately made his blood boil. Kiyu Neem was still a child. She'd always been so well behaved. He was sure this guy had seduced her. Duong flinched, scratching the bridge of his nose awkwardly, wanting to help, but not daring to intervene. He could only step aside with a helpless shrug. Fong Vu's expression darkened even further. He grabbed Kiyu Neem by her slim wrists, leaned down, and barked, Answer me, Kiyu Neem, what the hell are you doing here? She had never seen him like this. In her memory, Fong Vu was always busy, too busy to even eat dinner together. He'd wire money into her account and sometimes toss her a generic compliment like, "Nice job, keep it up," but anger? No, she'd never seen him angry. His eyes were sharp, nearly burning. She stared back calmly and said in a low, even voice, "I got a room, to lose my virginity." The officer nearby choked on his own breath. Tu Duong looked away in disbelief, covering his face. This girl, seriously. Fong Vu's expression turned from pale to red in an instant. His grip on her wrists tightened as his chest heaved with fury. The other officer didn't know what to do. He patted Fong Vu on the shoulder and murmured, "Hey, Captain Vu?" Fong Vu sucked in a deep breath. Without another word, he grabbed Kiyu Nim's hand and stormed off. "You handle the rest. I'm heading home." He dragged her out of the hotel. The night air was cold, and she was only wearing a thin white dress. A gust of wind hit her, and she shivered. Fong Vu glanced at her out of the corner of his eye, then silently shrugged off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It was still warm, carrying his body heat and that faint scent that always lingered on him. Kiyu Nim clutched the jacket tighter, his scent curling around her nose. A taxi pulled up. He opened the door and practically shoved her inside. The entire ride home, he didn't say a single word. His hand never left her wrist. It wasn't a long drive, just 20 minutes, and then they were back at the house. Only when the door shut behind them did he finally release her. She looked down at her wrist. Red marks stood out clearly against her pale skin. "Sit down." He pointed to the couch. She obeyed without complaint, shrugging off the jacket and setting it beside her. Fong Vu pulled a chair directly across from her, sitting down with his legs spread slightly and leaning forward, elbows on his knees. The weight of his presence was suffocating. "Tell me what the hell happened. Isn't today your birthday? Why were you at that hotel?" Back when he saw her in the hotel room, anger wasn't the only thing he felt. Guilt had hit him like a punch to the gut. He hadn't been there for her, not like a real father should have been. He'd neglected her, left her to grow up alone. And now, on her 18th birthday of all days, she'd gone to a hotel room with a man. He didn't even want to imagine what could have happened if he'd shown up 5 minutes later. If she had really gone through with it, how would he ever forgive himself? But Kiyu Nim didn't know about the guilt twisting inside him. She just stared straight into his eyes, dark, unreadable. "I'm 18 now," she said, her voice calm, "so I decided to give myself a memorable coming-of-age gift. I hired an escort to lose my virginity." Her face was eerily composed. Her words hit him like a brick to the chest. Fong Vu was speechless. He never would have imagined she'd willingly go to a hotel and pay a man for that. It wasn't some predator who lured her in, she'd done it on her own. For a moment, he just stared at her, stunned. Then Kiyu Nim yawned. It was already 11 p.m. On a normal night, she would have finished her homework by now and started getting ready for bed. Fong Vu had never said it out loud, but Kiyu Nim had always been the one person in his life he never had to worry about. Smart, independent, mature beyond her years, and yet, after what had happened last night, all he could feel was guilt. He had clearly failed her, not as a stepfather, but as someone who should have been guiding her. Taking a deep breath, he looked into her sleepy, half-lidded eyes and spoke more seriously than he ever had with her before. "Kiyu Nim," he said slowly, "I'm truly worried about you. What happened last night, that was my fault. I should have been there for your birthday. It's an important day, and I missed it. I know you're legally an adult now, but you're still a young woman. You need to learn how to protect yourself. You can't just give something so precious to any random guy who asks for it. Do you understand?" It was the first time Fong Vu had ever tried to talk to her like this. He wasn't great at soft talk, never had been. He could blow up at anyone in the world. But when it came to Kiyu Nim, he couldn't yell, couldn't raise a hand, and couldn't even bring himself to scold her properly. She was a quiet, well-behaved girl, but years of neglect had left her emotionally detached from anything romantic. She didn't care about love, didn't believe in saving herself for anyone special. Losing her virginity on her birthday wasn't about love or rebellion, it was curiosity. She wanted to see if sex really felt like what she'd seen in those videos her friends sometimes passed around. But watching was one thing. Feeling? She didn't know, so she decided to find out for herself. After he finished speaking, Kyung-nim just nodded politely. I get it. Can I go to bed now? I have school tomorrow. She let out another soft yawn. Her long lashes fluttering, a tear dangling from the corner of her eye, making her look more innocent than ever. Fong Vu sighed. Go on, get some sleep. He watched her quietly as she walked off to her room. Once she was gone, he slumped into a chair and sat there in silence for a long while. Finally, he grabbed the chair, pushed it back under the table, then reached into his coat on the couch and pulled out a pack of cigarettes. He stepped out onto the balcony, lit one, and exhaled slowly into the night. The next morning, when Kyung-nim stepped out of her room the next morning, the smell of hot food hit her immediately. She paused, surprised. Then she remembered, Fong Vu had stayed home last night. From the kitchen came the soft clatter of pots and pans. Still groggy, she rubbed her eyes and stumbled into the bathroom to wash up. By the time she came out, breakfast was already laid out on the table, complete with hot milk, eggs, and toast. Fong Vu, wearing an apron, turned and said, Come eat. His cooking skills were no joke. She'd had his food a few times before, and each time had left a deep impression. Unfortunately, he was usually too busy to cook, or even sit down and eat with her. They ate in silence. She didn't usually eat much in the morning, but today's spread was too tempting to resist. Compared to her usual plain bread or cereal, this was a feast. After downing the last sip of milk, she patted her stomach, grabbed her school bag, and headed for the door. But just as she reached for the doorknob, his voice stopped her. Wait, let me drive you. She blinked, turning around, confused. Since when did he offer to drive her? Was he suddenly on a break from being busy? Still puzzled, she followed him out. There was a car parked in the garage, since Fong Vu usually had access to a government vehicle from work. This one rarely saw use. Today, it was brought out just to drive her to school. As a senior in high school, her schedule was packed. Most students were already in the classroom by dawn, using the early morning hours for last-minute cramming. Their homeroom teacher also taught math, so the first study block had been turned into an extra math period. They didn't speak on the drive. Not a word. When the car stopped at the school gate, she reached for her seatbelt, ready to leave. Then he asked, What time do you finish tonight? 9:30. He frowned slightly, then added, All right, don't come home by yourself. I'll pick you up. She instinctively glanced up at the sky, like she was checking to see if the sun had risen in the west. Then she gave a small nod before turning to walk toward the school. Fong Vu stayed in the car, watching her figure gradually blend into the crowd of students before he finally pulled away. When Fong Vu arrived at the precinct, Officer Liu, the one who had accompanied him during yesterday's hotel room inspection, walked up to him eagerly. Excitement all over his face. Captain Fong, we found it, he said, handing over a file. Fong Vu nodded and took the documents. He'd been swamped with work as always, but what happened the night before had shaken him. It was a wake-up call, a clear sign that no matter how capable Kyung-nim had seemed, she still needed guidance, real guidance, and that started with time, something he hadn't given her in years. If he wanted to ensure she grew up safe and sound, something had to change. So, for the first time in a long while, he decided to scale back on work. Back at school, the atmosphere in the classroom was tense. The results of the most recent mock exams had come out, and many students hadn't performed well. The teacher was going down the list, calling out names and scolding those who scored poorly. None of it concerned Kyung-nim. Her grades were consistently strong. She never ranked below third in the class. She sat with her head down, eyes on her open book, pretending to read. In reality, she wasn't taking in a single word. Her mind was miles away, still tangled in thoughts of Fong Vu. The past. Kyung-nim had moved into Fong Vu's home when she was 10. Her mother, Vong Fuong, had been 25 at the time. Fong Vu was just 23. Even at 10 years old, Kyung-nim knew something wasn't right. She took one look at Fong Vu and thought, This man lives in a completely different world than my mother. She was right. Her biological father had been a drug trafficker, and it was Fong Vu who had arrested him years earlier. Back when he was still a newly minted officer, Vong Fuang, at 13, had run away with that man. And by 14 she was pregnant with Kiu Nim. When her father was arrested, Vong Fuang had stormed into the police station in a rage, demanding to see him. That was when she recognized one of the officers, Fong Vu, who had once been her childhood neighbor. They had grown up next door, and he had called her sis back in the day. But she had disappeared during her rebellious years, cutting ties with her family and choosing a life that spiraled quickly out of control. Now she was back, sobbing, begging for a second chance, spinning tales of hardship and survival. She pleaded with Fong Vu to give her and her daughter a home. Reluctantly, and perhaps out of some lingering sentiment for the past, Fong Vu agreed, under 3 conditions. 1. He would take care of them financially. 2. Their marriage would be in name only. 3. She was not to cross any boundaries, no romantic advances, no manipulation. Vong Fuang agreed and moved in with her daughter. At first, the arrangement seemed to work. They lived under one roof peacefully. But soon, Vong Fuang's insecurities kicked in. She feared that if they divorced, she'd lose her place and her comfort. So, she started trying to seduce Fong Vu, both subtly and not so subtly. But he was never interested. Work kept him busy, and even when he was home, he barely engaged with her beyond basic civility. That only frustrated her more. Vong Fuang didn't give up easily. She began showing up at his workplace, dressed provocatively and bringing him meals, embarrassing herself, and him, in front of his colleagues. To make things worse, people started gossiping. She became the joke of the department for chasing the precinct's most eligible officer. That was the last straw. Fong Vu lost his temper and warned her flat out, cut it out. One more stunt like that, and I'm filing for divorce. She was scared straight, temporarily. But Vong Fuang had always been wild at heart. Within a year, she was sneaking around with other men. Fong Vu knew, but he didn't care anymore, as long as she kept it out of the house. Eventually, she crossed another line, bored of a marriage with no romance, and egged on by her new boyfriend. Vong Fuang packed her things, took all the cash she could find in the house, and ran. She left her daughter behind, no goodbyes, no explanation, not even a phone number. She vanished to some far-off city, terrified that Fong Vu might track her down and take revenge. She even kept her location secret from Kiu Nim. Left behind. And just like that, 13-year-old Kiu Nim was abandoned. Her biological father was locked away with no parole in sight. Her mother had taken off with a lover, leaving her in the care of a man who, until then, had been more of a distant roommate than a parent. Neither side of the family wanted her. She became, in every sense, an orphan. But Fong Vu didn't walk away. He was still legally her guardian, and even though he hadn't asked for the role, he took it seriously. So there he was, a 26-year-old bachelor, technically married but still a virgin, raising a teenage girl on his own. Strangely, Kiu Nim didn't mind. She'd never been close with her mother. In fact, she'd always felt a quiet contempt for the woman's shallow, chaotic lifestyle. Living alone with Fong Vu, who barely came home and never invaded her space, suited her perfectly. The night that was supposed to mark her growing up had been ruined. For some reason, Kiu Nim felt bored. All day at school, her mind wandered. She couldn't focus. Every now and then, Fong Vu's face would pop into her head. Staring out the window, chin resting in her hand. She wasn't looking at anything in particular. She was thinking about him again. Fong Vu was handsome in that rugged, effortlessly masculine kind of way. His job as a cop kept him too busy to worry about appearances. So he always looked a little tired, a little scruffy, but it worked for him. Strong brows, sharp eyes, and a high, straight nose, and every time he frowned or tightened his lips, there was something almost magnetic about it. They say a guy with a big nose, well, you know. Bored, Kiu Nim doodled absent-mindedly in her notebook. Her hand moved before her brain could catch up, sketching something that made her bite back a laugh. Then she added a size next to it. At first, she wrote 15 centimeters, then she scratched it out. With a body like his, what was he? 1 meter 85, that had to be too short. 17 seemed more realistic. Yeah, that sounded right. She stared at her drawing, imagining the possibilities. Honestly, anything was better than another dull school day. When the final bell rang, everyone left in a rush. The day had dragged on forever. Most of her classmates looked exhausted. Kyung-nim, on the other hand, barely noticed. She stayed behind, finishing up her homework. A girl with a ponytail paused at the door. "You're not heading home, Neem?" She looked up, smiled, and waved her off. "You go ahead, someone's picking me up today." The girl nodded and left. Soon, the classroom was empty. Darkness filled the windows. Kyung-nim looked outside for a moment, then went back to her books. An hour passed. Her homework was done, but the man who said he'd pick her up still hadn't shown. The night guard began his rounds, checking room by room, if anyone was still on campus. They were told to go home. She could hear footsteps approaching. Then, the classroom door creaked open, and a flashlight beam landed on her face. "Still here?" The old guard frowned. "It's late. Not safe to be out like this. Go on, head home." His voice was firm, but his concern was genuine. Kyung-nim nodded politely, packed her things, and stepped outside. The sky was clear and deep blue. The moon lit up the street like a soft lantern. She started walking slowly toward home. It was already 10 p.m., and she'd missed the last bus. Even though Fong Vu didn't show up, she didn't feel upset. Not really. She walked quietly, her expression calm. Suddenly, headlights flared behind her. She stopped, blinking against the glare. A car door slammed. A tall figure stepped out, walking quickly toward her. He moved in front of the lights, blocking the blinding beam. "Kyung-nim," Fong Vu said gently, his voice laced with regret. "I'm sorry I'm late." He was still in uniform, clearly exhausted. Work had kept him longer than expected. The only thing that kept him going was the thought of her waiting. Guilt weighed on him. After a pause, he reached out and gently patted her head. "You must be hungry. What do you want to eat? Name anything." She blinked, her eyes wide and soft. "Wontons," she said quietly. He chuckled. "That's it? You're easy to please." Then he took her backpack and slung it over his shoulder. "Man, this is heavy." With her shoulders finally free, Kyung-nim rolled them back and followed him to the car without saying a word. For some reason, everything suddenly felt a little lighter.